I think that to be a man, you have to be a communist. And when I say a communist, I mean you have the unconditional belief that the masses of humanity in their entirety, right, that you are somehow connected to them. That is this sociological body that supports you, right? So when you discover something true in your head, you discover something true, if that truth cannot bear out consequences for the whole of the people, then it's not true. You know what Haz al-Din believes? This is why I'm saying you have to be a communist to be a man. Because I think all wisdom, and all truth, all intelligence, all brilliance, rises from the abstract to the concrete of a very simple way of life. The simple way of life of, for example, the peasant, who deals with the issue of how to reproduce themselves and their family and their conditions of subsistence, and develops a sensibility based on their concrete relations to other human beings and to their environment. That is the highest form of intelligence, brilliance, complexity, and wisdom a civilization is capable of producing. And any kind of philosophy, any kind of science, any kind of experimental use of thought or art ultimately goes back to that type of person. You know why we respect the Henry Fords? Because the Henry Fords have in mind that common man. However brilliant and genius Henry Ford was, he was thinking about the common man. All of these brilliant scientists, the ones who helped contribute to the science that leads to things like nuclear energy, who did those people have in mind? The millions and millions of anonymous human beings who need energy to live a modern life, to have access to the wealth and fruits of modernity. That to me is the true heroism of intelligence and brilliance. People always say there's a crisis of masculinity and whatever, right? Well, why is that a crisis? I feel like a lot of young men in the West are experiencing a crisis of masculinity only so far as their feelings are being hurt, and they don't feel validated enough, and they don't feel like they're getting enough attention in the same way women are, and there's a lot of resentment that women are getting all this attention and men don't. And it's really childish, and that's not a crisis of masculinity. That's not a crisis of masculinity. A crisis of masculinity is a crisis of shame. That's a crisis of shame. That's a crisis of being ashamed over the fact that you have nothing to live and die for. Crisis of masculinity is that you're losing the ability to insist upon the fundamental meaning that grounds human society, civilization, and existence. You're losing an active connection to that. That's the fucking crisis. In order to be a man, you have to embrace all of humanity, unconditionally, all of it. Because that is the sociological, that is the feminine body out of which masculinity defines itself in relation to. To be able to perceive that, to establish a point of distinction in the fabric of that whole, to be able to take into consideration the whole, to the entirety of humanity. That's what it means to be a man. I cannot fathom the idea of somebody running around calling themselves a man who is not, at least in some fundamental sense, a communist, even if they don't know it. There is no virtue for a human being outside of working for humanity as a whole. There's no thought, there's no science, there's no philosophy. It all is meaningless unless it's about the average person. That's the substance of what it means to be a human being to me.